Hello everyone. Have you ever felt like the past was better left behind? What if reconnecting with an old friend led you down a dark path you never saw coming? From eerie houses in the middle of nowhere to unsettling whispers in the night, these two stories will make you question everything. What happens when you're alone, trapped in a place that feels more haunted than home? As you listen, ask yourself, could you escape the things that lurk in the shadows, or would you be left frozen in fear? Stick around as we dive into The Trench Coat in the Dark House and The Dark Forest, two tales that will keep you up long after the lights go out. Chris had been living in Louisiana for years, but Austin, Texas, still felt like a second home. It was where he had spent his high school years, and although life had pulled him in different directions since, it still had a special place in his heart. On his last day in Austin, he got a message from Tom, an old friend he hadn't spoken to in years. They'd been close back in high school, but after graduation, they drifted apart. "Hey man, when do you leave? I'm just an hour outside Austin. You should stop by on your way back." Tom's message was enough to make Chris pause. He hadn't seen him in years, and the idea of catching up seemed appealing. So, Chris decided to take the detour. His GPS said it would take about an hour and a half to get there. The road to Tom's house was quiet and picturesque, winding through small towns and empty fields as the sun began to dip below the horizon. When Chris finally pulled into Tom's driveway, he couldn't help but notice the house. It looked a bit aged, but not in a way that suggested it was falling apart. It had a certain rustic charm to it, almost like a cabin tucked away in the woods. The wooden porch creaked beneath his feet as he stepped up to the door. When Tom opened it, Chris was immediately hit by the scent of old wood and something earthy, like the house had been there for decades. Tom greeted him with a big hug. "Long time no see, man," he said, pulling Chris inside. The house was just as old on the inside as it was on the outside. The furniture looked like it had come straight out of the 70s, and every step Chris took on the hardwood floors made the house creak as if it were alive. It was cozy, though, and Chris couldn't help but smile as he followed Tom into the living room. They caught up on life, cracked open a few drinks, and reminisced about the good old days. The whiskey warmed Chris up, and before he knew it, hours had passed. It was around 5 p.m. when they both realized how much time had flown. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier, and Chris felt himself growing more tired. As the night stretched on, the conversation continued, drifting between memories and laughter, until Tom casually dropped the question. "Hey man, you've got a long drive ahead of you. Why don't you crash here for the night?" Tom offered. Chris hesitated for a moment. He hadn't planned on staying, but he was pretty drunk and didn't feel like getting on the road in that condition. "Sure," Chris said. "If you've got the room, I'll take it." Tom smiled. "I've got a spare bedroom. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch." Chris followed Tom down the hall and into the spare room, barely noticing the heavy air in the room. The room itself was dim, with old furniture scattered about. Tom mentioned the room hadn't been used much lately, but Chris was too drunk to care. He collapsed onto the bed, the alcohol dragging him into a deep sleep. Chris's head spun as he lay in the bed, the alcohol still making his body feel heavy and sluggish. The room quiet, too quiet. It wasn't the comforting silence he was used. The toy was thick, like something was waiting, watching. He shifted uneasily under the covers, trying to ignore the feeling that had crept up on him since he lay down. His mind kept returning to the coat, that dark shape in the corner of the room. At first, he had brushed it off. It had to be a mistake, right? Just the way the coat was hung. Was it something more? It wasn't just a coat. As the minutes passed, Chris could hear his own breath. The room felt colder, despite the warmth of the bed. He slowly rolled over, glancing toward the corner where the coat had been. Nothing. Just the bare wall and the closet door. But something didn't feel right. Chris's heart skipped a beat. He sat up in bed, blinking hard, trying to shake the sleep from his eyes. The room was still dark, with only the faint glow of moonlight creeping through the blinds. He squinted at the corner, trying to reassure himself that it had just been his imagination. But there it was again. The outline of a dark figure, standing almost completely still in the corner of the room. It was like it had manifested from the shadows themselves, More than just a coat, something wrong about it. The shape was too tall, too unnatural. Its form almost human but distorted. Chris's heart began to race. He blinked again, rubbing his eyes, trying to bring clarity to the vision. But when he looked back, the figure was still there, motionless. But somehow, the room felt alive with dread. It was like the figure was watching him. For a moment, Chris couldn't breathe. He wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. He lay there, frozen under the weight of his fear. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, towering in the corner, and then a soft whisper, so faint he almost missed it. But it was there, lingering in the air. "Chris." The voice was clear but unnaturally calm. It wasn't Tom's voice. It wasn't anyone he knew. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Chris's stomach twisted. His limbs were heavy, as if the bed itself was holding him down, preventing him from moving. His mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was just the alcohol. Maybe he was still dreaming. But deep down, he knew it wasn't a dream. The room felt colder still, and Chris could feel the weight of the figure's gaze piercing him, even though he didn't dare look directly at it. He turned his head slowly, trying to stay calm, trying to keep his breathing steady. That's when he saw it. The figure's eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed. Not with light, but with something darker, something more sinister. It was like very air around it was being consumed. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping the figure would disappear, hoping that if he closed his eyes long enough, it would be gone when he opened them again. But when he opened them, it was still there. Closer. The figure had moved, silently, effortlessly, closing the distance between them. Chris's breath caught in his throat, his pulse pounding in his ears. He couldn't look away. He couldn't breathe. His body refused to move. The voice came again, this time more forceful, more insistent. "Chris, you can't leave." Chris's heart was pounding in his chest, each beat reverberating in his ears like a war drum. He could hear nothing but the rushing of his blood, the suffocating weight of the room closing in on him. He tried to swallow, but his mouth was dry. The figure was still there, its eyes glowing in the darkness, burning into him with a cold intensity that paralyzed him. The room was so still, so silent, that Chris could almost hear the very air around him. He wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. It was as if the figure was draining him of all his strength, filling his mind with a void, making him feel like he was no longer in control. He blinked hard, trying to clear his mind, but the figure didn't move. It was waiting, watching, as if it was toying with him. "Chris," the voice whispered again, now laced with an eerie softness, as though it was right next to his ear. "You can't leave. You've been chosen." His breath caught in his throat. He wanted to cover his ears, to drown out the voice, but he couldn't move his hands. His body was frozen, trapped under the weight of something unseen but very real. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows pressing in closer. The figure in the corner moved, its shape shifting in and out of focus, until it felt like the very walls of the room were closing in on him. Chris fought against the terror that was overtaking him. He had to act. He had to escape. With every ounce of willpower, he turned his head, forcing his eyes to look away from the figure. His feet moved before his mind could process it, pushing him toward the door. He stumbled, his legs shaky, his body trembling with fear. But as he reached for the doorknob, the whisper came again. "You'll never leave." In that fleeting moment of hesitation, Chris threw open the door, his body propelled by sheer fear. He ran. He didn't look back, not even once. The cold wind hit him as he stumbled out into the yard, but his feet carried him forward. He didn't know where he was going, didn't care. All he knew was that he had to get away from that house, from that thing. He always thought of himself as someone who didn't scare easily. But that all changed when he decided to take a detour to visit an old friend, Ryan. After catching up with him over drinks, the two decided it would be a good idea for Jack to spend the night. Ryan lived in a secluded, old farmhouse, miles away from civilization. Jack didn't mind. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to reconnect and unwind. But what was supposed to be a calm and nostalgic night soon turned into a terrifying ordeal. Ryan's house, though charming, had an eerie, old-world feeling to it. The creaking wood, the dim lighting, and the dusty corners only added to the unease that Jack felt as he entered. But he brushed it off. After all, it had been years since he and Ryan had shared a drink and a laugh. The night went smoothly at first, filled with laughter, whiskey, and familiar stories from the past. But as the night wore on, Jack couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had begun creeping in. He knew it was probably just the alcohol, but there was something unsettling about the house, something in the air that felt heavy, suffocating. By the time Jack decided to crash for the night, he was more than a little tipsy. "Why don't you stay the night?" Ryan offered. "I've got a spare room. Nothing fancy, but it'll do." Jack agreed, not wanting to risk driving back while intoxicated. Ryan led him down a narrow hallway to the spare bedroom, which was located at the far end of the house. As Jack stepped inside, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. It was as if the room hadn't been used in years. The furniture was old, the air stagnant. But Jack was exhausted, and within minutes of lying down, he fell into a deep sleep. Hours later, Jack was awoken by a sound of voice. At first, it sounded like Ryan, but the voice was distant and muffled. Jack sat up, his head spinning from the alcohol. He couldn't tell if it was a dream or reality, but the voice seemed to be calling him, beckoning him from the hallway. Confused and groggy, Jack stumbled out of bed, his legs unsteady. He made his way through the dark hallway, the air feeling colder with each step. As he reached the living room, he heard the voice again. This time, it was clear it was calling his name. "Jack." He called out to Ryan, but there was no response. The house was eerily silent, save for the voice that seemed to echo in the darkness. Jack walked through the house, searching for any sign of his friend, but the place was empty. There was no Ryan, no one at all. And yet, the voice was still there. He retraced his steps, his heart pounding in his chest. And that's when he saw the coat, a dark silhouette in the corner of the room, hanging from the closet door. At first, Jack thought it was just a coat rack, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized that the shape was wrong. It wasn't just a coat, it was something else, something watching him. Jack's stomach churned. He rolled over in bed, trying to ignore it, but every time he closed his eyes, the figure in the corner haunted him. And then, just when he thought he might be able to sleep, it happened again. The voice. And this time, it was closer. "Jack, you can't leave." Jack's heart raced as the figure moved. It didn't walk, it glided across the room, closing the distance between them without making a sound. Jack felt paralyzed, unable to move as the figure came closer. Its dark presence filled the room, suffocating him, and he couldn't escape it. The air was thick, heavy, and cold. "Jack," the voice whispered again, this time right next to him, sending a chill through his body. He knew he had to escape. He couldn't stay in this house. He turned and bolted, running down the hallway, the figure still trailing behind him. Every footstep echoed in the silence as if the house itself was trying to hold him captive. He reached the front door and yanked it open, but just as he stepped outside, the darkness swallowed him. He didn't know where to go. He didn't care. All that mattered was escaping the presence that was chasing him. He ran, his legs aching, the wind whipping through his hair. But no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still following him. As Jack sprinted through the woods, the trees seemed to close in on him. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind with dread. But when he looked over his shoulder, the figure wasn't there. He was alone. For a brief moment, he thought he had escaped. But then, something caught his eye, a car speeding toward him. It was Ryan's car. But it wasn't Ryan driving. The figure stepped out of the car, its form shifting, turning into the same dark silhouette Jack had seen inside the house. It wasn't Ryan. It wasn't even human. The figure was tall, its face obscured, but its presence felt like pure malevolence. Jack didn't hesitate. He turned and ran faster than he had before, not caring where he was going. His heart raced in his chest, but his legs were growing tired. He couldn't keep running forever. The figure's voice echoed in his ears, taunting him. "You can never leave. Jack didn't know how long he had been running, but eventually, he stumbled out of the woods and onto an empty road. His chest heaved with exhaustion, and his body ached from the sprint. He looked around, but there was no sign of the figure. His mind was spinning. Was it real? Had it all been some kind of nightmare? A car approached, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Jack ran toward it, waving his arms. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" the driver asked, concern evident in their voice. Jack didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too afraid. He just nodded and climbed into the car, not looking back. The figure wasn't following him, but somehow, Jack knew that it wasn't over. Jack's escape marked the end of one terrifying night, but the haunting presence of the dark figure remained with him, lingering in the corners of his mind. He wasn't sure what had happened in the woods that night, or why the figure had seemed to show a flicker of humanity. But one thing was certain, it wasn't over. The woods were still out there, and Jack had learned that some things weren't meant to be escaped. The nightmare might have ended for now, but Jack knew he would never be the same, and the shadow in the woods would forever haunt him. What do you think? Was it all just the mind playing tricks, or is there something more sinister lurking in these stories? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where something felt off, like you were being watched? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts might just give us chills. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more creepy tales to keep you on edge. Until next time, stay safe, because some things aren't meant to be escaped.